So President Trump met with Democratic leadership to discuss a potential deal to reopen the government. Obviously, part of the government shut down. Most of the programs impacting regular folks are impacted by this. But Trump ended up storming out in the middle of a meeting. So here's the press conference from after that happened.
But it is so sad that in a matter of hours or just a few days, many federal workers will not be receiving their paychecks. And what that means in their lives is tragic in terms of their credit rating, paying their mortgage, paying their rent, paying their car payment, paying their children's tuition, and the rest. The president seems to be insensitive to that. He thinks maybe they could just ask their father for more money, but they can't. And we think that the collateral damage that he is causing I'm going to yield to the leader to talk about that. But I would say this, if you don't understand financial insecurity, then you would have a policy that takes pride in saying, I'm going to keep government shut down for months or years, unless you totally agree to my position. I yield to the leader.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the president just got up and walked out. He asked Speaker Pelosi, will you agree to my wall? She said no. And he just got up and said, then we have nothing to discuss, and he just walked out. Again, we saw a temper tantrum because he couldn't get his way, and he just walked out of the meeting. I asked him to open up the government, that tomorrow so many people will have trouble paying their mortgages, paying their bills, dealing with situations when they don't get paid. And I said, just why won't you do that? We'll continue to discuss. We're willing to discuss anything. And he said, if I open up the government, you won't do what I want. That's cruel. That's callous. And that's using millions of innocent people as sort of pawns. And it was wrong. And then a few minutes later, he sort of slammed the table. And when Leader Pelosi said she didn't agree with the wall, he just walked out and said, we have nothing to discuss. So he said it was a waste of his time. That is sad and unfortunate. We want to come to an agreement. We believe in border security. We have different views. We've already offered the president our proposals, which has sat on his desk for several weeks. But this was really, really unfortunate and, in my judgment, somewhat unbecoming of a presidency.
Oh, my God, Mr. President. Well, I don't think you're acting like a gentleman, good sir. This is quite unbecoming of a president, if I don't say so myself. Oh, God. I mean, the finger wagging, come on, it's hilarious. And then he said, I don't agree with you. And Mr. President, I think you're wrong. Because he got up and he walked out. He walked out. They're just, listen, Chuck Schumer and Nancy, they're just from a different era in politics. Everybody has to believe in civility and decorum, and sure, we're all plundering elites, but we're together, aren't we? And so we can work together to keep screwing Americans. And, so Donald Trump is kind of the embodiment of the far-right base id, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. And then I told him, Mr. President, I think you're being quite unreasonable. As if Trump is going to be like, you know what? Chuck, you make a tremendous point, an unbelievable point. And now, I can see it from your perspective. That's never going to happen. Okay, so the best part of that was, honestly, Nancy Pelosi's line. I thought that was clever. She's like, well, the government shut down and all these people are struggling, and perhaps the president thinks that all these workers could just go and ask their daddy for money. But not everybody could do that. That's good. Because it's true. That's Trump's whole life, man. There's a famous story of Trump's casino. One of his casinos was about to go bankrupt. One of the ones in Atlantic City. And his dad showed up and bought like millions of dollars worth of chips and then walked out. And that was his way of bailing out his bitch-ass son, who took a terrible deal with an insanely high interest rate when he bought his casino. Trump is not a good businessman. He went bankrupt 6 times. And that's just one of many examples. He likes to say, I got a small loan of $1 million from my dad. That's wrong. He ended up, it was about $400 million that he inherited from his dad. And by the way, was it the New York Times or might have been another outlet? They showed in great detail using records that money was passed down illegally. They did tax fraud in the process. So he's had a silver spoon in his mouth his entire life. Now, having said all that, what's fascinating is, keep it real. This is Donald Trump fighting for what his base wants. Now, the country overall does not want the wall. 60% are against the wall. Only 38% are for it. But he is fighting for what his base wants. And so my message to the Democrats is, find you a politician who cares as much about Medicare for all as Donald Trump cares about the wall. You know, that's the ideal right there. Because what Trump is doing and what a lot of the Republican politicians do is they super serve their base, whereas Democratic politicians always stab their base in the back. And that's the difference. And we need some Democratic politicians who are actually going to represent their base, because it turns out that the base of the Democratic Party, when you go policy by policy, that actually represents the overwhelming majority of the American people. So, this is expected, Chuck and Nancy being weak, but we'll see what happens moving forward. At the very least, to give them some credit, they're not giving Trump exactly what he wants, which is great. I think Trump is wrong on this issue. So we'll see what happens, but I suspect Donald Trump might say this is a national emergency and I'm going to authorize funding for the wall without Congress, which then opens up legal battles, and then it's a whole nother mess that we have to deal with.